Finn, thank you so much for joining the show. For the people who don't know, could you give us a brief intro and then we can dive into it?
Yeah, no, it is a pleasure to be with you. My background is that I helped to start Build-A-Bear way back when it was 2 stores, actually, when I first helped to start. And then it grew to about 400 stores in about 15 or 16 countries. I left Build-A-Bear to go to work for a company. When at Build-A-Bear, I was a digital and technology guy. And then I went to work for an outdoor fly fishing brand called Orvis, where I was the chief marketing officer at Orvis, the experience officer, actually. So it was a combination of the CIO and the CMO combined at Orvis. I did that for almost 10 years. And then I left there to go backpacking around the planet for a year, kind of an anthropology trip, interviewing tribes, and interviewed the Yaguas tribe in the Amazon. I interviewed the Maasai in Africa. I interviewed scientists in the Galapagos and Antarctica. I interviewed the librarian of the oldest library in the world. Anyway, I came back from that, completely changed the way I think about the world, the way I think about myself. I learned more, I think, more about myself than anything else. But I got into private equity. And when I got back, so right now I do private equity, but I also am an ambassador for the National Retail Federation's CMO Council and the Digital Council and the CIO Council. So I help bring council members together, compare notes. It's kind of it's a trusted network that I work with where they can have an honest conversation. I just literally got back from doing that last week in Colorado. So learned a ton from this cross-functional group that had CIOs and their digital officers and CMOs in there. So it was really, really enlightening.
Amazing. I mean, there's a plethora of things we can start there, but and obviously I'm super interested to hear about Colorado and those insights. But I think let's start with Build-A-Bear. Could you tell us a bit more about, going from 2 stores, that experience? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, when I first started at Build-A-Bear, my Scottish mother was like, "You work for a toy company, a teddy bear company, right?" I think she had pictured that I was in the back room stuffing bears, right?
Yeah.
And so she was like, which is common for her generation, "I don't know if you can make money at doing that."
Exactly.
And
well, they turned out to do pretty well. So
fastest growing stock on the NASDAQ, actually.
Yeah.
They've done really, really well because it tapped into something that was way more than a product. And early on, we recognized how essential the experience was to what we were doing. And making that an amazing experience really taught me a lot about human interaction and human connection in a really, really meaningful way. And so when I started, we mapped out, I talked to my mom and said, "Hey, look, this is going to be as big as Disney someday." And my mom was like, okay, son, great,
Hey, go on.
All right, son.
Yeah.
But years later, I was presenting actually at Disney and we were showing them the store of the future. And when they heard that we were doing that, they brought 14 Imagineers with them. These are the guys that designed rides in the parks and things like that because they wanted to see what we were doing from an innovation perspective. They showed us a map of different brands that map close to Disney. And there was Build-A-Bear Workshop right next to Disney recognition for kids. And I was like,
congrats.
I'm going to take a picture of that slide, send it to my mother.
Oh my God. Right? A full circle moment.
It was a full circle moment. It was really, really kind of cool. And by the time we were done with the presentation of the store of the future, we got an ovation from the Imagineers, which was a huge deal for me because I have such respect for the stuff that they do.
And obviously you mentioned, one of the fastest growing stocks on the NASDAQ and the fact that you guys tapped into the experience going almost beyond the product. Could you tell us a bit more about that and maybe some of the, I know it's cliche, but the marketing tips or hacks that you think worked at Build-A-Bear?
Yeah, what's interesting is if you take a step back and think about the demographic of Build-A-Bear, it had a wide demographic. In other words, you could have a teenager in there going on a date and building a bear, or getting a date for prom, or a bear to ask someone to prom, or you could have a grandma collector in there. But the core demographic was a 10-year-old girl, generally speaking. And what was interesting is, if you think about 10-year-old girls these days, they're the most technologically savvy humans in the history of humans, right? So the value that they place on technology is way greater or way different than we did in my generation. What was interesting is we created the store of the future concept that we rolled out. And as we were rolling it out, we had some stores that the queue to get into the store was 4.5 hours
Jeez.
while we were doing this. So it was out the mall, around the mall to get into the store. And I would go to every one of the store openings. And I was standing there at a store opening once with a colleague of mine. His job was he oversaw all of the workshops. And he said to me while we were sitting there watching this interaction with kids in the store and having an amazing time. And this was digital and in-store mixed together. So we had a touch table that was interactive. We had, the heart ceremony that was very interactive. We had an interactive bathtub experience. We had Connect at the time in the store. We had all of this cool tech and store together. But he turned to me and he said, Finn, the greatest guest satisfaction number that we get is when one human connects to another human in the store. And I was like watching this interaction, and I would watch, and a little girl came in, and the store associate said, hey, why are you here? And she said, it's my birthday. She walked over, rang a bell. Everyone, it's so-and-so's birthday, right? It's Amy's birthday. You should have seen this kid's face, right? They were, from a human perspective, seen, right? And when other humans see you, it unlocks something for you. And I learned that at the center of the things that we do from a digital perspective is this human connectedness. And the more we can create this using digital to create these experiences where humans connect together, the more successful we're going to be. And so sometimes when I tell people that story, they think that I'm anti-digital. I'm not. I'm pro-human in the mix. And I find that the best digital experiences don't lose track of that emotional connection that you create through your experience. So from a marketer perspective and from a personalization perspective, people don't want to be tracked. They want to be seen. Right. And so keeping the human in the center of what we're doing and how we're thinking of it and making sure that they understand that we see them, that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned from my experience at Build-A-Bear.
And in terms of how did you guys then kind of execute on that on the digital side to make people feel not tracked, seen, but not tracked?
I think one of the things that we did, it was on the digital kind of marketing side combined, is we recognized when someone was a guest that we had before. If you look at the best associates that we had, they would recognize that Noah is back and they would call you by name. And so to the degree that we could do that from a digital perspective, where we understood that you were a really important guest and we appreciated that you were coming to our business and spending time with us, telling that story where we appreciated you and recognized you and your connection to us was probably the biggest thing. And so it goes well beyond putting your name on a generic email. It looks a lot more personalized. In fact, what we started to do at Orvis is we would send handwritten notes to our best guests, thanking them for spending time with us. That gesture of taking the time to connect with people made a massive, massive difference. We tested it in different varieties, and we found that the handwritten note, I know it's not real scalable,
but I think that's why it works, isn't it?
Seriously. And what we found is, look, we could have the store associates do this. So that's the scalability, right? Have the store associates write 5 notes a day of thanking people that came into their store. The impact that had from someone realizing that they had been seen, really seen, was really, really impactful.
And I think it's interesting, your point around Build-A-Bear. My assumption would be with a product like that, it's a bit like Marmite, where I don't know how much you like Marmite, but people either love it or hate it. And I think that the benefit, I love it for reference, but I think the benefit...
For the record, you love Marmite.
For the record. But my assumption is with a product like that, if you love it, you're probably the kind of person who is going to collect them and buy 10. Or you're kind of not interested at all. There isn't really a middle ground, I think, with Build-A-Bear. Maybe that's wrong, but that would be my assumption. And I think there, with, naming the person when they come into the store, all that kind of personalization, it further gets that person who is already probably a massive advocate for you guys to kind of double down even further, to buy even more and more.
Yeah, I think, yes, we did have raving fans for sure that loved Build-A-Bear. But we also had people who would use Build-A-Bear as a connection. So for example, we had we had, especially during kind of wartime for America, we had lots of examples of kids or moms who would come in, they would build a bear and dress it in the uniform that their father or their mother was wearing. And so when they were deployed, then we invented this technology that allowed you to capture your voice. And so they would capture the person's voice and they would put it in a bear, and they would give it to the kid while their mother was deployed or their father was deployed. Yeah. And so we had so many stories like that, these human connected stories where people were using Build-A-Bear as this connection to their meaningful relationships. And so it went way beyond collectors or people who loved teddy bears into people who wanted to memorialize their relationships or connect their relationships in unique ways. And so we had some really cool ideas that came out of our guests coming up with things that they could do.
I'm just imagining kind of that's the exact kind of thing which now on socials would blow up, a video or on TikTok or Instagram, a kind of social series of spotlighting those different characters who put, their voice into Build-A-Bear, and then, it's in a place of hardship or wherever it is. Those kinds of things I think work really well. No, super, super interesting. It reminds me of, I was speaking to a girl who is the founding kind of GTM on a recruitment tool. And one of the best things that works for them is they do a spotlight of all the most exciting or weird and wacky roles, which they've placed by their kind of AI agent. And that always gets a load of inbound because obviously people care about the kind of story and they buy into the video. So it works. It reminds me of that. The second thing I kind of want to speak about was you mentioned the kind of experience more in the title, like the experience at Build-A-Bear, and then also the crossover of like the experience role at Orvis, and you're kind of doing almost two roles at once. I might not have explained that perfectly, but could you explain it to people listening and what that actually looked like at Orvis?
Yeah, so at Orvis, I had both the CIO role and the CMO role. And honestly, what happened was my CEO came to me. I didn't expect this at all, but I was over at digital and technology and that kind of thing. And he came to me and said, "Hey, would you head up marketing?" And I hadn't thought about it too much. And I said, "Look, I don't know anything about catalogs. And Orvis is the oldest catalog company in the US." And
I didn't know that it was the oldest. Wow.
Yeah. He said, "We have plenty of people who know catalogs. That's kind of the point. You don't need to know catalogs. We don't need to think about what our future looks like in catalogs. It's really, what does our future from a digital and experience perspective look like?" So I said, yeah, I'd be honored to do it. He then asked me the second question, which is, do you want technology to report to somewhere else? And I said, absolutely no way. I want to keep technology. Because what I recognized was if we were building a meaningful experience, then the enabler was going to be technology. It was going to be the foundation pieces. It was going to be the infrastructure. It was going to be the framework in which we operated that would create and deliver amazing experiences. And so we created a role called the experience officer, and I had both of those parts of the organization report to me.
And I think that's definitely a kind of interesting trend in the sense that you've got, the oldest catalog in the US, very much a legacy brand, but then you've got, how do we reinvigorate some maybe modern digital life into it? I think that's happening probably with a lot of similar American businesses where, there's the kind of speed of culture and the kind of rate which people need to publish and create things on digital is completely different to, let's say, a quarterly or monthly catalog. How did you, when you're at Orvis, think about, great, let's make sure that we keep the roots of the catalog and keep that going, but then also adapt and improvise for the time where, we need a high rate of content and for socials on the digital side?
It's a great question. What we did, Noah, is we did a process that I came up with, with our teams at Build-A-Bear that I call playback. And what that means is what we do is we show what the entirety of the experience is going to look like from a consumer's perspective. So we take an afternoon, we put our consumer hat on, and we show every channel, every outreach that we have, and we show it literally printed out what the story is that they're going to see for that whole quarter, right? So we would do this on quarterly basis, kind of rolling. So we would go into photo shoots, for example, knowing here's kind of what we needed and this is what we wanted to get. And then we would come back and do a playback where we would show here's how that story is coming to life, but we wouldn't just talk about what it was for the catalog or what it was for digital. We would show it on a huge, we had whiteboards, a room that was filled with whiteboards, and we would literally lay out, here's what digital looks like, here's what catalog looks like. So it's like a mosaic of the story that was coming to life. So we started those meetings with, here are the products that we need to go make money with, right? That we need to sell and that need to be successful. And these are the highlighted ones. Here's the overall story arc. And then we would literally look at what the creative looked like for those stories to come together, which catalog was a part of that, but so was digital. So it was, and then in store. So we could look across the entirety of the organization to see how the story was going to come to life, because we started by putting our customer hat on as if we were going through the experience ourselves.
And in that process of documenting from the customer side, whether it's combined digital catalog, what's something which worked really well, which people wouldn't expect?
I think there were a few unlocks in that whole process. One is sometimes there can be a disconnect between what your marketing says and what your merchants think. There's often a healthy tension there. Merchants think, I just need more marketing, and marketers think, I just need better products. That's how it works all the time. And so when we would start our season with getting merchants and marketers and technologists all in there at the same time, then early on, it aligned us to, here are the biggest and most important stories. And then we would literally talk about the size of our buys for those products, where we thought the product was going to resonate the most. And then with that as the backdrop, we could lay out what the story looked like. What it did for us is it immediately got us aligned around what the most important stories were. And we got that healthy tension between merchants and marketers came to the forefront at the earliest time. In other words, when we could use that tension to refine what the story was and how we were going to go to market, that's when we used it. Often what happens is that tension comes out after, when you own too much of the wrong product or when you are marketing the wrong thing. We wanted to get those really interesting conversations up early on and get alignment early on. And that was probably the biggest unlock for the whole thing.
And to just make sure I understand correctly, you guys did almost a meeting with the merchants, you guys, and this kind of technologists, at the start of each kind of quarter or financial year? How did that work?
It was
I imagine that's quite difficult in terms of the scale across with every merchant, no?
Yeah. So it was at the beginning of each quarter, but we would be 6 months out. So for example, we would be, last quarter, we would have been talking about what Christmas looks like, right? What the holiday looks like. And we would literally map up with the calendar. Here are the 12 weeks that we're talking about. And we would do that on a quarterly basis. That playback had two parts. One is, this is what we're looking at, and we would go through that. The other playback was, we're going to the springtime, we have our next stories look like this, and we are going to highlight these types of products. And we would take that kind of feedback into our photo shoots in South America, for example, in Bariloche. We would have all of our content for our briefs already worked out because we discussed what that looked like in our playback beforehand and got the weigh in from merchants. And so it did take a lot of coordination, by the way. We had,
I'm sure,
someone that was a producer for us that could, have a whole bunch of spinning plates at the same time. She was really, really good at it. And it helped to have someone like that who was a big project person that could bring us together in a meaningful way.
Amazing. No, it's super interesting. And I think to now flip the focus on to kind of retail and retail CMOs, and you mentioned Colorado, could you tell us a bit more about what you do in the retail CMO space? Because I will butcher it. So if you could explain that to us.
Sure.
And then maybe speak a bit about the mood in Colorado or things that keep coming up in those conversations with those CMOs.
Yeah. So taking a step back, when I was at Build-A-Bear, I was the chairman of the Chief Information Officer Council for the National Retail Federation. That's all the major brands that are in retail. And this council was this opportunity for us behind closed doors to have honest conversations with each other, Well, when I was a young CIO, that was hugely valuable for me because I could compare notes with people who had done this before. And this openness and this willingness to help each other was super, super impactful to me as a CIO. Well, then I go to Orvis and I become a CMO. And so I actually was the CMO chairman of the CMO Council for the National Retail Federation as well. And so I'd been a CIO chairman and now I was the CMO chairman. And for the same sorts of reasons, I could compare notes. I could connect with people. It was a trusted network that I was building. Really, really powerful. I learned so much from that. Every meeting I'd come away with 5 pages of notes of here's the things that I could go test.
Yeah.
Because I knew that Carhartt was doing this, or I knew that Steve Madden was doing this and they'd seen success. Fast forward, I come back from that journey around the planet backpacking, get into private equity, and now I start as an ambassador for those councils, mostly because I valued them so much. They made such an impact on me, Noah, that I was like, I want to continue to stay involved and help others to take advantage of that same kind of trusted network that I had seen so powerfully. And so now I'm an ambassador for NRF. Well, last week we had a special meeting. It was called NRF Nexus. And at NRF Nexus, the CIO Council, the CMO Council, and the Digital Council all met together in the same room. And we were talking about the human side of AI, the human change side of AI. And every one of those leaders are dealing with the exact same thing. And most of the time, when you're on a leadership team, you're working with your partners across the organization. You're not singularly working on things. You're working with them as a team. And so having CIOs in there, CMOs in there, and CDOs in there at the same time was hugely powerful, hugely powerful. I did a podcast called Seekers and Disruptors that I'm going to publish this today, actually.
Nice.
And it was interviews of all, some of the things that we learned through this process of having this kind of cross-functional team talk about the human change side of AI. And it was extremely powerful. So it's networking is really important professionally, but trusted networks is a whole different thing. When you can be vulnerable, when you can have trust with others, then you can learn and get so many more ideas and so many things that you can implement into your own business.
And to your point about trusted network versus network, I assume that a lot of those CMOs almost maybe let their veil down a bit more in terms of what they're actually thinking in those groups. You mentioned the kind of human change around the AI part. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, interestingly, so I have a ton of respect for a guy. His name is Wesley Har. He started Media Monks. It's a media agency. They do GMC and they do Johnson & Johnson and they do Google. They're their ad agency. Well, in 2023, Wesley sent to his organization a letter that essentially said AI is an existential threat to agencies, marketing agencies. In other words, it's going to completely destroy what the traditional marketing agency looks like. And he said, we can either be victims of that or we can be the change makers of that in his letter. That was in 2023. And so they went down this path of rethinking the entirety of their media agency from ground up using AI. They are 2 or 3 years ahead of where most of us are. Interestingly, and he's got story after story of the things that they're seeing that's making a massive impact from an AI perspective. Every year, though, he sends his team, not a team goal, but he sends a singular sentence as at the beginning of every year that kind of sets the tone for the opportunity for the year. This year, he sent a provocative statement. He sent the AI technology is ready. The humans are not.
Yeah. Double click on that for us.
Yeah. So what he was observing is technology is way, way far. It is so progressed. It can do so much for us. But our ability as humans to change quickly, to learn quickly, to adapt quickly is what's holding AI back now. And so that was the kind of the thesis of our conversation last week is there was a study that was done in addition to Wesley's comment, Cordial. This is Rob Garf, along with Dr. Janet Sherlock. They did a study from a CMO study on staffing, and they found that of CMOs reported that learning agility was the number one thing that was in the way of adopting AI fully. In other words, how fast people could change, how fast they could learn. So with that as the thesis, we spent our time talking about what's the best way to build agility into teams so that you can take advantage of what's happening from an AI perspective. Because the real get right now is helping your human part of your organization to get it and to learn quickly and to adapt and to be agile.
I think it's a great point that the technology is ready and the humans aren't. And it's interesting in the sense that from speaking to marketing teams, there's often some marketers who are so for it and very much, I'm all into adopting this new technology. And there are others who maybe a bit more reticent or don't feel as comfortable. And I think what's happening is, as a result, is you're having more divisions within teams themselves, because some people, the task that took them a couple of hours on a Friday now takes them 20 minutes. So they're now using that extra time on a more valuable task or something else. But then other people are still using the same maybe legacy tools and aren't seeing that rate of progression. So for the first time, it's okay, you're almost not just competing against the different companies, but you've now got divisions internally within your marketing team because you've got different rates of adoption, which causes a whole other set of problems. So when you're speaking to these different retailers and the CMOs who are kind of leading these teams, what is the advice for, you've got, okay, the junior marketer, the kind of mid-marketer, senior marketer, and the CMO, how are they thinking about AI from those different levels?
I think your observation's spot on, by the way, Noah. I think that there's, from a human perspective, we as humans vary in our adaptability and our ability to change. Right. Some are very, very big change agents and others are not. We had lots of discussion about what that meant and how to help people to change. Some of the ideas that came out of that that I thought were really, really significant is creating space for experimentation. It used to be that organizations would go through a couple of significant changes a year, maybe major system overhauls or major changes to their business model, and that would happen a couple of times a year. That's happening 10 or 15 times now a year. So it's constantly changing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a new update to the model, to a new tool every week.
Totally. So that rapid change is the norm, the new norm, right? And so understanding how to survive or thrive in a rapid change environment comes down to a few things that we can do to help our teams. One of them that I found that was most interesting was creating a culture of experimentation and not having all the answers, but experimenting to find those answers. In other words, rapidly prototyping and rapidly doing things instead of saying, hey, here's the whole plan and here's how we're going to invest in it. And
Exactly.
It's going to take 12 months. Instead, you say, here's the thesis. We're going to rapidly iterate and we're going to change and we're going to continue to improve. Cultures that create this space for innovation, I think, are going to see more success. That's what we're hearing from the CMOs and the CEOs that I talk to as well, is when they can build agility by celebrating people who iterate and rapidly prototype ideas, and creating a culture that does that and celebrates it. That's a huge unlock for companies who are seeing success around this.
And it's interesting because I think that previously, let's call it when digital started and kind of social media, and you had brands that maybe were the first to truly exploit those channels and get on TikTok or start TikTok shop or whatever it may be, just the first adopters. And maybe they got a head start of, let's say, a year compared to their other competitors from leaning in. And their competitors, it would take them a year to kind of catch up. But I think the danger now for those companies that aren't leaning in is the lag time is way more competitive. It's, if you're a company who isn't adopting this, the company that is, because AI has such a big impact, it's almost a 10x of, okay, well, they've now got a 4-year or a 5-year head start on you, and it's going to be very difficult for you to catch up. And I don't think as a marketing leader, you can adopt the same almost waiting periods that maybe we would have been used previously in terms of digital and say, great, we know X people are testing or trying this. Let's give it kind of 8 to 12 months or, another year and see, because that might have worked previously, but now I feel like you're not given those liberties.
No, I totally agree. Because by the time you get to that spot there, every quarter, things are changing dramatically, right? Something that took 1 or 2 years is now happening in 1 or 2 months. And so I think you're spot on with that observation. You can no longer sit back and say, let's see how this plays out. And then we'll be second
Exactly.
adopters,
Yeah,
quick
100%.
adopters. We're in the quick adopter stage. And so learning from others and saying, hey, what are you saying that's working? And I'm going to go apply that to my business. That's kind of the stage that we're in right now.
And I think for retailers specifically, it's a really interesting point and kind of question around AI, just because you're often more tapped in with the consumer, because obviously you're selling directly to them, and consumers are naturally a bit more ahead of businesses. Let's call it in the essence of consumers are using ChatGPT probably in their daily lives, or these types of AI chatbots and tools. So they have a rate, there's a lot more familiarity with it. And I think that there's maybe, I lost what I was saying. Let me just remember.
Maybe that the familiarity they are in their personal life, they can apply it to what they're doing from a business perspective.
Exactly that. But yes, so right. The point around consumers' expectation with AI, because they're more familiar with it, is higher compared to maybe people in the B2B world. Could you tell us a bit about, and so the businesses, the retailers are forced to catch up to consumers in a way. And that's kind of my point, which is consumers are moving fast and using AI in their daily life. And maybe businesses are kind of waiting to see how things play out. So retailers are kind of positioned in between the two, and they have to go, great, we need to catch up to the way consumers are using AI and their expectation of the experience of AI. Maybe a better example would be you saw kind of Walmart integrating with ChatGPT, where you can kind of purchase items through that, acknowledging that the customer journey and experience has completely changed because of AI, and they weren't ready to say, okay, let's wait to see how things play out. Could you tell us a bit more about, maybe I kind of phrase that poorly, but I think the point is consumers are moving faster and retailers need to catch up. Could you tell us more about what you think the good retailers are doing to implement AI in the right way?
I think that the fact that the consumers are feeling this in their daily life and they're applying it to their daily life, I think you're spot on. I think that it sets what their expectation is, not just what a retail expectation is, but their overall expectation that everything is going to work like this, right? And so I think that's one of the conundrums that retailers have, because they're constantly working with consumers that are changing so much. Right. And this is not new to retail. Retail has changed and evolved so much in the time that I've been in retail for the last 20 to 30 years. And so them staying lockstep and relevant is always an important part of what their brand is, and part of their brand promise, and part of their experience. And so they're constantly thinking about, where should we show up, and in what way should we show up that's most meaningful. That said, there's a little bit, this is changing so fast. It's a question of, how is that commerce experience going to manifest itself in ChatGPT? And there's a lot of arguments about how that will actually play out. Some people believe that will be a chat interface to do your shopping. Others believe that won't ever be a great interface. Where I land, so the jury is still out for people, and even people doing their own shopping behavior. It's very, very low percentage of people who actually shop using ChatGPT. It's because the experience is bad. It's not great. Now, by understanding why people shop don't shop for convenience only. Like, AI is super good at convenience, but that's not the only reason that they shop. They shop for validation. They shop for self-expression. They shop for personal identity. There's literally a phrase that humans call retail therapy.
Yeah.
It's because you go out to shop, to browse, to discover, because that's part of what makes you happy. You enjoy it. Well, I think sometimes when we talk about commerce being in the chat interface, we miss the fact that humans, it goes back to my first example, if we miss the human in that whole process, humans enjoy discovery. They enjoy finding things.
And
but they also enjoy convenience, by the way. So where chat can really help is say, I'm going to a black tie dinner this weekend. And then Noah, you say, chat, go find me 10 options, right, that I can do. Or it knows you so well that it's already gone and found those. So you discovering those brands and then you exploring those brands yourself, that will be an important part of what you do. So it can help on the convenience side. And then we need to keep in mind the reason that people shop isn't just for convenience. They shop for a lot of other anthropology reasons than just convenience.
I think the retail therapy point is a great point. And I also think that's where a chat interface, or let's call it some interface, which isn't just a typical kind of point and click, really works, because it allows you to get a level of customer care and personalization, which is almost impossible if you walk into a store, because I can think of anything and go, oh, actually, I can start with the kind of idea of, I wear green socks. What shoes are going to work best with those? I'm going to this terrain. I can almost filter by 40 different categories and hypothetical worlds and realities, which if I just walk into a store, or maybe I'm on a standard site, I maybe have 3 or 4 filters from price. I've got swimming shorts, I've got longboard shorts and shortboard shorts. So I think that's interesting, where we want something that feels so personalized and perfect to us. And I think something about shopping is we like to use our imagination. I think that's where Claude, ChatGPT and that chat interface can be really interesting. We'll see.
Can I make one other observation there?
Yeah,
because I think it's really, really important, especially at the store level. So what's interesting about what you just said is where chat can make a massive impact is it can aid you in discovery, because you can ask it questions and it can come back with, here's the options, and those green socks will go with your black tux or whatever.
Yeah.
It will help you with that. So it can help you on the efficiency of the discovery process. Absolutely. That's where it can make a big impact, I think, and that there's some really, really positive experiences. When you go to the store to experience this, or even online, one of the things, taking a step back, what I would do with my teams, both at Build-A-Bear and at Orvis, is I would, on a regular basis, take them on shopping experiences.
Yeah.
But
they love that.
Yeah, it was great, because I would say, watch how people actually shop. I mean, 80% of retail still happens at a store where people touch the product. And if you watch what they do, they touch and they feel the fabric and they hold it up in front of them. This is a tactile experience. It's not a visual experience only, because they want to touch, feel, and handle the product, and they want to see what it looks like on them. So there's digital versions of what that means, by the way, that we can also do. But it's an experience of, how does this fit, and how does this look on me, and what does this look like? And so when it comes to doing that at the store, when you're in front of a store associate, you're not just looking for convenience. One of the things that real great human store experience people do is they also help validate and they help guide and they help host. Those are human elements. So what's interesting is, as AI rises, the discovery, the automations, the efficiency, let AI do that. And then what that means is that the store associate can do more human things and be more human, be a better host, be validating, be understanding. So it's the combination of those two things that I think are going to create the next generation of store experiences.
100%. I mean, in a future world, you have almost like AI generated customer profile for everyone that walks into the store. You know what they like, you know what to say to them. I think at the moment, it feels more we're in a world where the typical store associate, just being very generalist, probably might not be asked or bothered to maybe do the right level of kind of due diligence or care. But if you're using an AI interface, they just tell you that they do what you ask them to do. And I think that sometimes, but if you're using a human, they might be tired, they might have not, they might be hungry, they might be in a bad mood. So it's an interesting kind of idea of sometimes it's helpful to have something that's maybe slightly emotionless. But then also, I do think the value of a human experience is massive when it hits you at the right time. So it's a really interesting one. I think you're probably right. A combination of the two probably is the best form.
What I think is going to happen is the associates that are mediocre, that rely on spewing a bunch of facts to the customer, and they think that that's what a good associate does, those will struggle in this world, because AI will take over what they do and do it much better than them. Those other associates who understand that they're a host and a guide will do very well in this kind of world, because being a host and a guide is way more emotionally connected, and the combination of that. So I think you're right. I think those that are mediocre are going to struggle in this kind of environment, but those that understand that they're a host will be successful in the future, I believe.
And something else that I find kind of really interesting, just because it's contrarian in the sense of what's been talked about with AI, is you shared some research about how AI was actually increasing jobs in terms on the marketing side. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Because obviously I feel like the narrative recently has been AI is killing jobs. Could you tell us a bit more about that research and your post?
Yeah, it goes back to that research that Dr. Janet Sherlock did with Rob Garf and the Cordial team. They surveyed a bunch of CMOs and they said, how many of you are planning to hire more in the future or less in the future or stay the same? Half of them said, the vast majority actually said, I'm going to hire more. And if you combine it with, I'm going to keep my team about the same, it was the vast majority of the people that they talked to. It was only it was a lot smaller percentage that said they were actually going to reduce the size of their team. When we drilled into that question through an interview process, what we found is that what's happening for CMOs right now is that the skill sets for what it takes to be good at AI, like how do you use AI from a model perspective, and how do you think about business process, and how do you think about crafting experiences that have AI in them? How do you think about from the ground up, blowing away what you do and recreating it? That's a skill set. Those that have that skill set, they don't always have on their team. So what's happening is a lot of CMOs, they're not just eliminating make work that AI can do. What they're doing is they're hiring people who can enable AI in their organization in a much more effective way. So in net, it's contrarian to what we see in the media narrative that AI is causing job loss. That's certainly not. That's challenging that assumption that actually is true.
I read something from the CRO at OpenAI, and she was saying that, when Excel came out, people said accountants would lose their jobs, but actually they still use Excel, but they have way more time to spend on other things which make a better return for their clients. And I think it's a very similar thing with some of these AI marketing tools.
Yeah, last week when we were in our meeting, we had a guy, we were talking about AI. He was showing an army of accountants with adding machines. Like if you want like ledgers that you were writing, adding machines, and the whole organization had adding machines. And then when they automated that and got Excel, all of those people didn't lose their job. In fact, accountants are 10x more accountants than there were before with better tools. So I think we're going to see the same sort of thing come in AI. I think we do get caught in a media hype about that gets a little overblown sometimes. So we have to be careful between what we see in the media. I think from a hiring and firing perspective with AI, we'll see how it plays out. But what we're seeing is it's certainly challenging that media narrative.
And now some quickfire questions. I kind of love these. So we'll start with just the AI tool that you use every day.
I use Claude and ChatGPT. I use both of them.
Yeah. And kind of anecdotally, I feel, it's felt that Claude, Anthropic/Claude has been dominating, but I think that I hear a lot more, even developers starting to use Codex more, and the new kind of model from OpenAI is really, really good. I've mostly been using Claude. I use ChatGPT sometimes, but do you find yourself now kind of skewing towards one or the other, or is it more even?
I find that for work automation things, Claude is amazing, right? For creative work where I'm brainstorming some creative things, or I'm going to run a meeting or something like that, and I need 5 ideas, and I've got, these are my starting points. I find that OpenAI is really good at that too. So especially because it knows me and it knows that I've done this before, and it can build off of some of the stuff. So I found that it depends on the job.
Yeah.
The way I think about these as tools, and it's not a one size fits all. I'm finding that different tools are really good at different things. And so I think we're going to continue to see that. By the way, I think we'll see more Gemini tools for automation come out. We'll see some other things that are going to happen. This will continue to evolve very, very rapidly. And so being agile around what tools you choose, I think will help us to be successful as well.
And then a retail brand that's quietly winning right now that nobody's really talking about?
I think one of them that's I have so much respect for is Tractor Supply. Tractor Supply is rural America. They have thousands of stores across America. They are doing some amazing things with AI and AI enablement at their store level, where
such as?
Well, they have a tool that they created that allows, if you think about all the things you have to remember as an associate, from chicken feed to what Carhartt jacket someone should buy to lawnmower and how it works, major lawnmowers or tractors and how it works. It's a impossible task of remembering it all. So they have an AI that is an assistant that you can talk to, and all of these associates have headsets where they can actually have conversations with this AI on the floor. It doesn't take them off. It doesn't take them to this. They can be standing there with the guests and they can ask their AI to give them more information about it. And I love examples like that where they're testing some really, really interesting things that are making an impact for their business. I think they're super successful. I think this one's well known, but Walmart is absolutely crushing it, in my opinion, with how they think about AI. I was in this meeting last week, and one of my friends there works with Walmart, and he said probably 2 years ago, the CEO of Walmart, to get a meeting with this person, that was a big deal. So everyone prepares for the meeting and they get all ready to come to the meeting. He said they all showed up at the meeting, and the first question that Doug, the CEO, asked was, "What did you do to prepare for this meeting using AI?" And all of them were like, well, "This is our own work. We did this." And he said, and they also said, "We don't use AI because IT said don't use it for these risk reasons." And he's like, "This is the thing that's going to disrupt retail. We better get really good." So within months, they all had ChatGPT. They completely changed. And every meeting that you come to with him, he would say, "What did you do to prepare using AI?"
I love that. That's so good.
Yeah. He set the game that they were playing.
Yeah,
right? He set
brilliant.
the permission to go think differently. That kind of behind the scenes that's a major, major brand that it takes a lot to change, right? When you're that big. But the fact that he set the stage for using this, and he expected that people would prepare by doing it to come to him with things that they'd used AI for, that leadership helped to unlock their capability, I think, for AI in a really major way.
I love that story. And what's one AI use case within marketing that every retailer should be using AI to help them with?
I think there's a couple that we're seeing that are successful. One is there's a lot of content stuff that you can use AI for, and meaningful content. Content automation, digital content is getting so much better. So I think we're seeing a lot of wins there. In addition, we're seeing a lot of wins on the personalization side.
Yeah.
Massively. So we just led around with Spangle AI, for example. And what they do is when you're on Instagram and you click through on an ad, they dynamically build a landing page for you based on your browse behavior and who you are. So it personalizes a page for you. That kind of personalization, they're seeing a 20 to 50% return on ad spend. So we're seeing it on the personalization side, and then we're also seeing it on the automating of content side. I think those are two really, really great examples of where we're seeing good traction in marketing.
Amazing. Well, Finn, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was lovely to chat to you.
Same here. No, it's good to see you, man. Thanks.